All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us here this evening. My name is Holly Grand, and I am going to be facilitating our webinar this evening. And I just want to go over a few reminders before we get started. First, because this is a webinar, your cameras, microphones, and chat are all disabled. If you have any questions during the presentation, please use that Q&A feature. It's going to be located at the bottom of your screen in Zoom. We're going to be answering questions at the end of the presentation, but if you have a question during the presentation, please feel free to type your question into that little chat box, and you can do that at any point during the webinar. If you want to provide public comment about the proposed mariculture site that we're talking about this evening, please email them to our Oyster Mariculture email address, which is oyster.mariculture@tpwd.texas.gov. We are not taking public comment through Zoom. That email address will be on the screen several more times during the presentation, during the webinar today, and in a follow-up email you're going to be receiving from Zoom tomorrow. In addition to that contact information, you are also going to have a link to our Texas Parks and Wildlife Department Education YouTube channel, where you'll be able to view a recording of this webinar. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to our presenter, for this evening, Lindsay.
Okay, thank you, Holly. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with our presentation. So the purpose of this public hearing tonight is for the proposed site G-0013, a grow-out facility in Matagorda Bay. And the purpose of the meeting is to provide information on the proposed cultivated oyster mariculture grow-out facility. I'm sorry, this is in Matagorda Bay, not Aransas Bay. Answer any questions about this proposed facility and give instructions on how to submit public comment. Some background on the Cultivated Oyster Mariculture program. We sometimes term that COM as an abbreviation, so you might hear me refer to it as COM during the presentation. TPWD permits the activity of oyster mariculture at the grow-out sites or at nursery hatchery facilities. All of these are off-bottom mariculture. While the structures may be anchored on the bottom, they don't rest on the bottom unless in like a tropical storm event, but floating in the water. Applicants nominate their own sites and conduct a natural resource survey. The permit is a 10-year term, and only eastern oysters from Texas broodstock are allowed for mariculture. There are 3 common gear types that you may see at the various locations. The first is floating bags. So large bags that contain the oysters with floats on the bottom or on the sides in the water. The next type is floating cages. And so these are larger cages that contain versions of these bags. And this is what they call a drying position, and then the feeding position, so you would see floats on the water. And another is the adjustable long line system, where there are baskets that contain the oysters strung on a line that is moved up and down positions on poles to vary the level in the water. An annual fee is paid based on the size of the grow-out or the nursery hatchery site. These permittees must also get authorizations from other agencies: the Texas General Land Office, Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and U.S. Coast Guard. There is an active use criteria requiring a certain amount, 100,000 oyster seed, so a certain amount of oysters, small baby oysters, be stocked per year. Year-round harvest is allowed. However, they must comply with all Department of State Health Service regulations. So for this presentation, proposed site G-0013 is an oyster grow-out facility located in Matagorda Bay, which is Shellfish Harvest Area TX15, and these are considered approved waters. It is for 12 acres and with the business name Matagorda Bay Oyster Company. Here is a vicinity map. So within the larger Matagorda Bay system, over in a smaller area, sometimes referred to as Oyster Lake. And here's a zoom in of the site position in the four corners. And then also on this is the access route that they would take to get to the site. The proposed site is proposing to use floating cages with 2 columns and rows, and I will show a site layout diagram next. Anchored with helix anchored and using nylon lines. There will be buoys at each anchor, marking each anchor point. Navigational markers will be approved by U.S. Coast Guard requirements, with the proposing a minimum of 4 corners with pilings with required lighting and labeling, but will follow any other guidelines from the Coast Guard. Bird deterrence, if needed, will be flags on poles and large zip ties on floats and cages. So that's where zip ties go around and then stick off to discourage birds from landing on those floats. So this is a overview layout of the different acres within the proposed site. And then to further zoom in on 2 different acres. So having 2 columns with a larger access route down the middle, and then within those columns, having rows of cages on a line with 10 to 15 cages per line. Here's a cross-sectional view of the gear. So the gear is anchored, and then in the feeding position, so floats up, cage and bags down. In the flipped desiccated position, the cage up and floats down, or submerged in the case of grouts. I'm sorry, in case of a storm. On-site operations will be accessed by boat daily, weather permitting. All work is conducted from a boat, no getting out or walking. It is a deeper site that you could not walk around. The floating cages system will be flipped for desiccation as needed. Tumbling of the oysters, tumbling and sorting of the oysters will be at a location adjacent to a marina, so on shore adjacent to a marina area. And cages will be removed and transported to shore for cleaning. All gear will be tagged as per regulations. The hurricane plan storm plan that we require for all applicants to register, weekly checks of equipment throughout the season. If a storm enters the Gulf, check stock and reduce stocking densities if necessary. Sink cages if the location falls within the cone of determination, and post-storm recovery includes refloating cages, inventory, and reporting any missing gear. For the Natural Resource Survey, they did side scan and sediment graphs. So here's an image of the side scan. The site in this square in the middle, the 200-foot buffer, is represented by the pink line, and the 500-foot buffer represented by this lighter green. Now, this site is proposed to be located next to another conditionally permitted site, and they have written owner permission from this conditionally permitted site that is next to this one. Side scan was conducted October 31st in 2022, and the sediment samples collected at the end of 2022 and at the beginning of 2023. There were 270 samples total. there was the samples were collected with a 10-inch PVC pipe. So here's the picture of that. So PVC pipe, I'm sorry, a 10-foot PVC pipe connected to a larger PVC pipe with 4-inch diameter to bring up those samples. The depth range was 6 to 7 feet across the site, and the sample compositions of those grab samples were mud or mud clay. No seagrass or oysters were encountered. And here's pictures, examples of the sediment samples that were taken. So proposed for this site, the next steps, public comment is open and will be open until June the 28th. You can submit your public comment to the oyster.mariculture@tpwd.texas.gov. After that public comment period, 2-week comment period, if there were any public comments that needed to be addressed, those would be addressed. If not, then a conditional permit is issued. The conditional permit mariculture activity cannot begin, but they take that conditional permit and secure authorizations from other state and federal agencies. Once those are secured, then the final permit can be authorized and issued after the first annual fee is received, and then mariculture activity can begin. So again, you can submit public comment to this oyster.mariculture email address. And if for further information, you can visit TPWD website and search Oyster Mariculture. And now if you have any questions, you can submit those to the Q&A. And I'll leave this slide up here with the web address. Actually, I will back it up one so you can see the deadline for public comment and the web address. Again, if there are any questions on your screen, there's a little Q&A button that you type your questions in. We'll just pause in case anybody is typing any questions or think about that, and we'll just give you a few minutes to submit any questions there. Okay, well, it looks like there aren't any questions at this time. If you are watching this recording later or think of other questions later, you can also submit any questions to the Oyster Mariculture email address. And with that, I will hand it over to Holly to close this out.
Yeah, thanks, Lindsay. And that really is what I wanted to kind of remind you all of, is that you can at any point reach out to us at that Oyster Mariculture email address, and we'll respond to your questions or comments at that point. And that will be that email address can be found in that follow-up email you're going to be getting from Zoom tomorrow, along with a link to our YouTube channel where you can find this recording. You might have to give it 24 hours or so for it to be made public, but it will be up at some point this week. So thank you all again for joining us. Thank you, Lindsay, Karen, for being on the call here this evening. We appreciate it, and we'll see you next time. Bye, everyone.
Bye.